speaker, Rob McBean. You want to come forward, Rob? Rob's a housing activist with Acorn, a former voter contact organizer with the Toronto Centre New Democrats, and a longtime member of Socialist Action. Here you go, Rob.
Okay. So first, let's take a look at this idea of superfood. Are there foods which are in some way better to other non-super or just regular foods? Are there superhumans walking among us who are just so much better than us because they get to eat the superfood while we eat the regular food? Now, the reality is there are actually only two separate valid categories that you can put people into based on what foods they eat. Those two categories are people who are malnourished and people who are not. Now, I'm not a medical doctor, but I feel pretty comfortable saying that no one in this room is suffering from malnutrition. Many people in our capitalist world do suffer from malnutrition, and I think that would be an excellent subject for a different film night. Now, the idea of a superfood, as the film said in these exact words, is more of a marketing ploy than it is an actual real thing. This idea of superfood, in my opinion, is about making regular food super expensive. The best proof that I can think of this, that you can see like with your own eyes, is go to those bodybuilding stores like GNC, or there's a shelf in Shoppers Drug Mart where they sell dietary supplements. Okay, these places will happily sell you these jugs or bags of like powdered food that you mix into liquid. Okay, they want like $80 to $180 a pop for like plus tax. Okay, they're gonna attempt to pass off this food as like some sort of miracle food. Like it is going to fix your illnesses, build your muscles, detoxify your liver, increase your red blood cell count, etc. So on. Now, these super expensive food products are made, literally, from just regular food. Fruits, nuts, vegetables, plant and animal products are dried out, grinded up, ground up, and mixed together. You are getting absolutely nothing special or different than what you would get from just eating regular food. So while superfood may be a bit of a fake idea, that does not invalidate the very real and very critical issues that this film brought up. The two serious issues that we saw in this film are that farmers can't sell what they grow, and that farmers are getting kicked off their land. Both of these are economic issues. Now, there might be one or two Marxists in this room, and they might recognize that when farmers can't sell their stuff, that's because of a crisis of overproduction. They might also know that when farmers get kicked off their land, that's because of the declining rate of profit in capitalism. But not everybody's a Marxist. So for the rest of us, let me explain what those two things mean and give some local examples so that it really clicks. Okay, so let's start with farmers can't sell what they grow. We have a great example right here in North America that perfectly explains this problem. The US and Canadian dairy industries are as different as night and day. In the US, over just 2 small years, 2017, 2018, 6.5% of the entire dairy farm industry went out of business. That is well over 4,000 small family farms going kaput in just 2 years in the United States. What is going on? Well, large agribusiness corporations are finding more productive methods of getting milk from cows. This means they can make more milk faster and do less work. So that sounds like a good thing, right? But in capitalism, that means that the markets get flooded, prices go down, and the rate of overall profit goes down. Now, the big mega corporation factory farms are doing okay for now, and it's the smaller farms that are paying the price. They simply cannot compete with corporate mega agribusiness. This is actually a very severe crisis. This crisis is so severe that suicide is now actually becoming a problem in the dairy farmer community. Some American dairy farmers are literally ending their own lives because of the crisis of overproduction in their industry. The other side of this problem is milk waste. Farmers cannot sell their milk, so they just dump it on the ground. Over 100 million tons of milk are dumped onto fields in America every year because it can't be sold.
Shame. What's that figure again?
Oh, it's exactly 128 million tons per year.
120 million.
Dumped into fields yearly. This in a country where they will chase you down the street, throw you to the ground, handcuff you, and put you in prison if you take a carton of milk out of Walmart without paying for it. Now this obviously sounds terrible. There is some good news though. So let's all pat ourselves on the back because the Canadian dairy industry is a very different story. In Canada, Barry knows, in Canada, dairy farming is subject to the system of supply management. Under supply management, which also includes the egg and poultry sectors, farmers manage their production so that it coincides with the forecasts of demand for their products over a predetermined period. I literally cut and pasted that out of Wikipedia. Crises of overproduction don't happen, all the milk gets sold, and everyone knows what their paycheck is going to be every month. Okay, wait a second. Did I just say that there's a plan of production and that it's designed to meet needs? Well, you know, I think some of you know what that sounds like. That sounds like socialism. The Stalinists used to call it collective farming. We call it supply management. You can call it whatever you want, but it is very close to how socialism goes, and it works. All the horror story stuff from the United States doesn't happen here because of our superior socialist-like production methods. Okay, so then the other problem is farmers getting evicted off their land. Now, when farmers get kicked off their land, that's caused by the decline in the rate of profit that capitalists are making. Why does the rate of profit for capitalists always go down? It's because very, very rarely, like once in a blue moon, the ruling class will actually innovate production methods so they can make more stuff faster, sell it cheaper, and put their competitors out of business. It works out good for the business that's using the best production methods, but then all the other ones get ruined. When production methods in capitalism get better, the overall rate of profit for property owners declines. So you take someone who's used to making $20 million a year, but this year they only get to make $2 million because their business is failing. They will start to seek other methods of profiteering. These methods can and will include all kinds of nasty, dirty stuff, like evicting farmers off land so that they can sell that land on the market for profit. And we don't have to look far to see this going on in our own backyards. This is the same thing happening to farmers in other countries. It's happening to workers right here in Toronto with the housing crisis. So that 2-bedroom apartment you were paying $900 a month for is much more valuable to your landlord with you not in it. Your landlord can sell that building at a profitable price. The new landlord can move in someone else who's going to pay double the rent. You're just in the way. So get ready to have the landlord tell you they need the property for their own personal use, or that they're going to renovate it, or they'll give you some other story, just to get you out the door and out of the way. Because the overall rate of profit for the rich always declines, this kind of nasty exploitation will always be happening in a capitalist society. Okay, finally, let's look at fair trade programs. Are we going to fix capitalism and save the world with fair trade programs? I have no doubt that some farmers in some places are getting real help from fair trade programs. The problem with fair trade is that it's basically just private charity. If you voluntarily pay more for some food because it's fair trade, it's just like donating to the United Way or tipping your server at the restaurant. It's a nice thing to do. It probably means you're a good person and you should feel good about yourself, but it's not a revolutionary act. paying double for a kiwi fruit is not going to overthrow the bourgeois state and usher in the new order of workers' democracy. Private charity actually does not even qualify as a reform of capitalism because it's not an entitlement that every farmer has. So you, as the donor, and the fair trade organization itself, you get to pick and choose which farmers are going to get the help and how much help they're going to get. Social programs, on the other hand, like welfare or child benefits, are a reform of capitalism. They're funded through taxation on property owners, and everyone who meets certain criteria can qualify for them. That's a real reform of capitalism, and private charity doesn't meet that standard. Finally, the bigger a private charity is, the greater the potential for abuse. So let's pretend that I'm running some fair trade charity and I get a bunch of consumers to donate $70,000 for farmers in Bolivia. Okay, sure, I could give the 70K to the farmers, or I could just go buy myself a boat. Or I could give half of it to the farmers and get a smaller boat. Are you going to call the Bolivian farmers and find out if they got the money? How would you even do that? And even if you could, how would you figure out how much of the 70,000 the farmers got? What if I only scammed 15,000? Are you going to be able to figure that out? With big private charity comes big potential for corruption. Okay, so to sum up, superfood is not really a thing. It's just regular food, and it's probably super expensive. Farmers can't sell what they grow because of a crisis of overproduction. That just means there's too much stuff being sold at the same time. Farmers being evicted off their land is because of the declining rate of profit and the need for rich people to increase exploitation of workers and farmers to make up for what they're losing. Finally, fair trade programs, they do help some people. They are really just private charity, and that doesn't fix capitalism. Okay, so is there any solution to these problems? Well, yes, you bet there is. Workers' revolution, seizure of the farms, seizure of the food production and distribution networks, the construction of a planned socialist economy based on meeting everyone's needs and not just making private property for the tiny, rich, ruling class. That's the solution. One solution, revolution.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rob. That was a great presentation. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take any questions or comments. We'll take, 4 or 5 questions and come back to Rob. Don't go far, Rob. You need a pen and something to write on. Okay, in the back. Yep.
I'd like to say that about a couple of years ago, my ex-wife for letting Jarvis and none in a big house with the rented to 30 people. And, the owner, pretty soon the owner said that everybody had to move out. But 30 people live in like a small building, like 4-story building. And the owner said everybody had to move out. Well, pretty soon after that, I find out that they built a big, huge condominium.
Of course.
And that building, which was for $2.5 million, $2.5 million was sold for $10 million. Because it was about like 2 years of negotiations. So after they say, okay, $10 million, fine. So they built this huge condominium, all the poor people have to move out. So it's just happening all around Toronto, so pretty soon poor people won't be able to find cheap rent. You know what I'm saying?
They're not ready now, never mind it.
That's
right.
There's no plan. In the landlords are getting smarter and they say, hey, wait a minute, if I turn my house into a motel or something, probably make more money. So you see, this is bad for the poor people. So it's very hard to find cheap rent pretty soon. Not now, but maybe in the future.
It is now. It is now.
Oh, well, it is now. Well, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Peter?
Yeah, thanks, Rob, for that. You mentioned capitalism. Capitalism also changes the way food is produced. You saw in the film, that family was growing the quinoa, the subsistence, and a little that they sold to the market to gain some income. And same with the tech farmers. But when it became popular, I think the problem came that there was some people from the city bought up land, and some farms, large farms, were turned to mechanized farming, and probably there's some displacement, and the small farmers couldn't compete with the bigger farmers, and in other cases, capitalism floods a third world country with product grown in their country. And this happened in Haiti with the rice production. And people, once they flooded Haiti, with that, Haitians who grew their own rice couldn't compete with the American thing. And that's why you see some of the problems Haiti's having today. And even Bill Clinton even admitted that. So, and even when we try to do minimal reforms, and this happened in the 70s, I think land reform is, we need at least land reform. The capitalists are even against that. So, like I agree, we need revolutions. And the 70s and 80s, there was a reform movement led by developing nations, mainly the Bangtan Group, for a new international economic order that would create something like you mentioned, a stabilization fund, a supply management commodities, so that countries that depend on commodities like coffee, sugar, would gain some certainty of price, some insurance in bad times. But that never happened, so they reverted back to the old exploitative trade relationships where the rich countries benefit at the expense of the poor countries. So we have that unequal exchange. So that's just a comment. There's a good book out, I think a monthly review book. I haven't read the book, but it has some pretty good reviews. Foodie's Guide to Capitalism. And I think we have to think about it. When we think about food, we have to think about the structures that are involved in it. And that if you want a fair thing, like fair trade, like you said, it's not a solution. You need a structural solution. You need a fair terms of trade in the intermediate and in the longer term, supporting revolutions and solidarity with countries like Haiti, countries like Colombia and Brazil. Even Brazil, one of the foods that are popular here is soy. And because of soy production, the Amazon being cut down.
Wrap up, Peter.
To grow soy. So we have to think about some of those stuff and try to get rid of capitalism, like we said.
Okay.
Thanks, comrade. So I'm gonna, just to let folks know, I'll try to keep the speakers to 3 minutes per speaker, and we're also going to adhere to a gender balanced list. So if any non-men would like to speak, just put up your hand.
Non-man?
Corey.
We're not
I'm going
now?
to sort of take over where Peter left off, talking about a little bit of the environment, because it wasn't really brought up in the film about how these sort of monocrops really tend to destroy the environment and ruin life for native species and the communities living around there. Because when monopoly capitalism gets in and it can run out other producers, right? It doesn't really care about the wealth or the quality of life of the community, but it cares about its own wealth generation, right? And so those people who are living in that area will no longer benefit from what's produced in that area. Like there's a lot about palm oil being produced in the Amazon, how they're just slashing and burning that rainforest, destroying habitats for orangutans and for other species down there. And along with monocultures, you were more susceptible to parasites and to other invasive species attacking your crops, and so they then have to bring in pesticides, which creates all kinds of other problems. It just snowballs, right? And so that's something maybe I would like to ask Rob to talk about more, is about the environmental impact of superfood, I guess, production in developing countries or anywhere in the world, right? And I wanted to say the main point that I got from this film was about land and how land is becoming privatized everywhere, and it's being put in the hands of very few people, away from the masses, right? Which has been going on for a long time, right? And there's been fight back against it throughout history, but it seems like it's getting to a pretty ridiculous point now. And so I think that we really need to look at that and think about ways that land can be publicly accessed and operated by the community, for the community, even within a city, to be more self-sustainable. And that's my comment. Thanks.
Thanks, Corey. So I've got 2 more people on the list. Oh, okay. Go ahead. Yeah. Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, hi. I really appreciated the movie and your insight, Rob, right?
Rob, yeah.
On the Superfood Chain. One thing I wasn't expecting, and this was really food for thought, some people got that, is your take on the fair trade. The fair trade, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not, or it's just a charity.
It's just a charity.
I really have to look into that because I had heard that fair trade was a good thing. Plus, in this documentary, it also sounded like it was a good thing.
Yep.
In this documentary, so I don't know. Maybe you'll be making a documentary called Fair Trade. Is it fair or not?
Unfair trade.
Right? But since you're from Acorn, can I ask you about? And you brought up the housing. Can I ask you about November 13th? Apparently, there's a meeting at City Hall, and I was wondering if you could tell us what that was about.
Yep. Okay. Can we stop now?
Sure, yeah, we can
Okay.
do that. We can come back, yeah.
Okay. So I'm not going to comment on the environment stuff because I'm terrible at environment stuff. Okay, fair trade. Maybe I knocked it a little too hard. Okay. Oh yeah. Okay, maybe I was too hard on fair trade. If people are getting helped by fair trade, yay. So we always support every good thing that helps working class and farmers, people, and does not help the rich ruling class. But I believe that my point about fair trade remains valid because it really is a voluntary thing. It's not like the rich are paying taxes and this wealth is being transferred to people who qualify for it. It's actually kind of an attack on consumers in here because you do have to pay double for that kiwi fruit. Okay, so it's you subsidizing the paycheck of the Bolivian farmer, not the rich person. You're paying for it. So is that a good thing? I don't know. Maybe if you can afford it, great. So Acorn, yeah, November the 13th. Today's what, the
8.
yeah. So I forget exactly what day that is. I
Wednesday.
think they want us to be there at 9 a.m.
It's a Wednesday.
Yeah, I think they want us there at 9 a.m. and it's Old City. Is it Old City Hall? I don't know. Check out their website. They have everything posted. New City Hall. I can't remember exactly what room. I'm probably going to be there. I got a lot going on, but that's on my list of things to do. And apparently there's going to be some big critical votes. They're going to be supporting inclusionary zoning. That means if you want to build here, you better bloody well put some affordable housing in.
Yes, yes.
Right on.
Yes.
What does that mean, though?
Yeah, what does that mean? Okay, so everybody, the rich will try to say, well, we'll only rent this at 90% of market rate. We're so inclusionary. Obviously, we would like to see, rent geared to income.
Right.
And so then this will be the struggle. This is the struggle. So if that struggle is important to you, I recommend that you show up to City Hall on November the 13th. Check out the website before you go so you can get really good info on it. I think the actual real thing starts at 11. They put out a call for people to show up at 9. Maybe that's early for you. You don't necessarily have to get there that early, but that's what's going on. Okay, so I'm going to stop it there and we'll just go back to the floor. So I didn't address your environment question, but I'm really bad at environment.
Okay. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Rob. Okay, so I have 2 names on the list, and maybe I'll add my name as well because I may be able to address that monoculture issue a little bit. John?
So that was a pretty good example of privilege porn. That movie.
Yeah.
If somebody lives in what looked like about $1.5 million house in East End, Toronto,
Yeah.
surveying third world, including Indigenous people in Canada, and oh, how charming, how
Yeah.
sweet.
Picked
On that aside, so first world
Supports
privilege
fair
porn.
trade.
That being said, the real issue is, one, take on fair trade. Many fair trade organizations at the point of production are worker and producer co-ops and need to be supported. 2, not all of them, the mark doesn't tell you, but it is worth researching. 2, the reason fair organic trade is more expensive is because of the subsidization of factory farming. That the fact that most farms in Canada are subject to the factory farming system, where farmers are basically tethered to a manufactory, they produce food that then goes into an industrial process that produces processed food in boxes in the grocery stores that create diabetes and health problems because the food is shit. Right? The cheap food is shit because of tax policy and support for an industrial food system. So it's not that organic and fair trade food is expensive, it's that all the subsidies are going to the factory farmers, some of whom are in the supply side on the managed supplies, because not running a dairy farm is a multi-million-dollar operation. So it's not necessarily the case. The structure of supply support is as you described it, but the devil's in the details, and many of those farmers are multi-million dollars. So the question of food deserts and superfoods, it's a superfood because what our industrial capitalist food economy produces is crap. What the food writer Michael Pollan has simple rules for eat food, mainly plant-based, right, and not from a plant. Right? So food that your grandmother would have recognized, not in a box, right, mainly plant-based, right, and not so much. And then many of these health problems. So the question of superfood really does get at a fundamental class issue in Canada if you elide the porn. And what we should be talking about is how the food system in Canada generates ill health, creates income inequality. Factory farms are incredibly heinous towards animals. I just don't. You know how you keep a cow producing milk? You keep her pregnant, yank the foal away as soon as it's born, and keep her pregnant so that the cow loses their foal repeatedly over and over and over again. It's an absolutely disgusting process. I'll just end with pointing out, in the last 2 days in Germany, there were 2 competing protests by farmers against the government. The industrial farmers clogged Berlin with 10 kilometers of big-time tractors because the environmental rules and the anti-phosphates were costing them their profit margins. And the organic farmers protested in Hanover because the government isn't supporting organic farming sufficiently enough. Class is at the heart of this, and that shouldn't be forgotten.
Thanks, John. Thank you. Thanks, John. Okay, I'm going to go to Basil and then Barry.
Yeah, just a small thing, like they said, like for example, I think we touched it in one of our films, like avocado, 1 kilo of avocado would take like 2,000 liters of water to grow, you know, and like chocolate, like 100 gram or bar of chocolate will take like around 1,700 liters, like 10 bathtub of water. Like of course it will grow the plant, coca plants and things. So many of those like advertised as healthy foods. They consume water, and sometimes water scarcity is all over the world is not that much. So this is why also it creates sometimes problems when they do these marketing for the healthy food. So it's just the water becomes scarce now and scarcity, and then they are trying to, and some plants all over the world are consuming that. So. Sometimes we don't know the impact of that superfood, even though it's produced and it's said healthy, but there is impact on the environment, on the water consumption in other parts of the world.
Thank you. Okay, Barry.
If the U.S. Mexico-Canada trade agreement is ratified, it's going to get worse. One of the heinous things it does is attack the supply management system affecting dairy. And not only does it undermine supply management, which is like a glimpse of socialism, what could be, but it also introduces more into the Canadian consumer market American dairy products which have chemicals in it which are harmful to your health. But second point, the film kind of distorted the picture of the world state of agriculture, especially in the less developed countries, because it talked about small producers, small farmers, as if that's the norm. In fact, there are large latifundia, there are large landowners, large farms, which are not geared to the needs or even the prospects of small farmers. And they are vertically integrated into the big chains that process and sell food in the developed world. So we got to keep in mind concentrated ownership of land. It's one of the tasks of the bourgeois revolution of the 18th and 19th century that has not yet been accomplished in the 21st century. So that's one of the reasons why we talk about permanent revolution, that is completing the tasks of the bourgeois revolution in this age, in this modern age. And that can only be done by the workers and the farmers allied, at the head of which must be a revolutionary party. Second point, third point, Frankenseeds. This is not just a matter of monoculture, it's worse than that. Seeds are designed, genetically designed by human beings, by scientists, to be disease or pest resistant. And then farmers become dependent on these seeds. And when they go into debt and can't afford to pay for these seeds, they go out of business, they can't support their families, and there's been a rampant degree of farmer suicide in India for this very reason. Thousands of farmers have committed suicide because they can't support their families, they can't pay the debts that they've accumulated because they can become dependent on these genetically engineered seeds. I don't know if that's true in Central America, across Latin America. We have comrades here who can speak to that issue better than I. And I also just want to give credit. I think Peter DeGama made a brilliant intervention. And Peter is an activist with Acorn. There's several Acorn activists here, Virginia, Rob, and others. We work closely with that organization. And Peter was the Socialist Action candidate in North Etobicoke Ward 1 in the most recent municipal election.
Great, thanks, Barry. Anyone else? Anyone else? The only thing I wanted to mention is, so Cuba went through quite a change when it comes to agriculture. When it was, after the revolution, it largely depended on imports from the Soviet Union. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, there was a special period where there was an economic crisis. Cuba didn't get the material support that it had relied, its economy had relied itself on. And that support included fertilizers and all sorts of things to keep food growing. But what ended up actually happening, from what I understand, is that the fertilizers that they used over decades was quite harsh to the soil. And after some time, it was quite difficult for any crops, the crops that they were relying on, to really grow without the additional fertilizer. But even, the situation was getting pretty bad. So they were forced to essentially adapt, and that meant that they were forced to start to look internally with what resources and knowledge they had, and there was a transfer towards more smaller farms, organic farming, and it's been quite successful. I mean, I've been there outside of the resort. And during the special period, you hear all kinds of horrible stories about how much people struggle to even get the basic calories per day for survival. But the markets there are filled with fresh fruits and vegetables, and it's healthy food. I mean, it's really good food. It's the food that we would like to see here, and we do. But you have to pay a premium for it sometimes, unfortunately. So I think that there is an issue with monoculture. There's an issue with overproduction. The overproduction and the collapse of the price of food, like any commodity, just shows how insane capitalism is. I mean, we're just looking at lands that are basically destroyed by monoculture, environments that are destroyed. It destroys the biodiversity within whatever area is being farmed. And for what? For the profit of a tiny minority of people. And even they will suffer at some point in terms of how much profit they're making. So it really is crazy. And I mean, when we talk about socialism, we're talking about production, because production can't end. We obviously need to produce food. And we might need to keep some of those factory farms for a little while until we can develop a more stable way of growing food. But it's about production for human need and not for human greed. And I think that Rob gave a bit of an example, just in Canada, about having a planned dairy economy, basically. You know, we don't, from what I understand, dump, what was it? How much?
128 million.
128 million gallons of
Tons.
tons of milk on agricultural land to use as fertilizers, essentially, or waste.
Waste, yeah.
Shame.
Shame, yeah.
And they'll arrest you at the Walmart if you don't pay for your milk.
Right. And there's the other thing. What's that?
It's the last round.
Yeah, I think so, unless, has anyone else have any questions or comments, anything they want to say? So we'll take first-time speakers. I see a few hands. In the back in the hat, go ahead.
I'm Grace, and I just want to make a comment that we waste about $45 billion every year by throwing away the food from Walmart and other supermarkets. So it's a pretty gigantic waste, $45 billion.
Yep.
And just look at the streets of Toronto, the homeless people and, you know, the soup kitchens and so on.
It's a crime.
We should work on distribution or trying to, you know, take that food and sort of distribute among other people who are hungry and starving, especially the children. 1 million children in Canada go to bed hungry, so this is something to think about it.
Rich country.
Thank you. Thank you very much. John?
I met a farmer from Saskatchewan about a year ago, and I just listened to him talk because I actually wanted to learn something from him. But he was telling me that, like, farms in Saskatchewan, they have to be 10,000 acres. Like a farm in Ontario is 100, 200 acres. They have to be like 10,000 acres to be sustainable. And they have to pump phosphates into the ground every year. They take around the tractor and then it's actually gas. They're actually pumping it into the ground to grow their bushels of wheat and soy, whatever. So they're actually at a point now where they're really, it's not sustainable the way they're going, but he would actually argue that the world would starve without all this fertilizer being used. And I just held my breath and I thought, you know, you thought about how much waste the reports, these tons of milk being thrown away, the waste. Go behind a food market and see what they throw out. Or how about just changing, if we changed our diet a little bit, make a bit of an effort not to eat, you know, high protein red meats, you know, each and every day. So I just thought he was totally wrong, but I listened to him and learned. He said, no, you don't share combines anymore in Saskatchewan. You know, maybe 50 years ago, 10 farmers would share a combine. No, every farmer has the 10,000 acres. He's so rich and big, he has his own combine now. So it was interesting listening to him.
The bank has it.
Thanks, John. Did you have a comment, brother?
Yes, well, thank you very much. I'm interested in getting some information on the North American Free Trade Agreement renegotiations, which haven't been ratified yet. And there's changes, big changes in the dairy industry have been negotiated. But in order to get confirmation, they had to get around the power of the Quebec dairy industry, which is the most organized dairy industry in Canada. Apparently Trudeau sold them out in the negotiations in order to get the United States to sign on. They wouldn't sign on unless they got major inroads into the price arrangements under the dairy quota system. Can you add to that?
Can we maybe stop?
We've got one more hand, and I think we're going to stop there. Okay, in the back. Yeah, go ahead.
One of the reasons for wishing to maintain this supply system in Canada is that the U.S. is very anxious to eliminate it because they have millions of tons of dairy surplus, which they can offload into any place. Hopefully, Canada. They did this to Jamaica and completely destroyed their dairy industry in a very short period of time, because the vast quantity of surplus dairy pumped into Jamaica was sold at prices so low to the price necessary to maintain the dairy industry in that country. They wiped out the dairy industry in a year. They'd like to do that in Canada. Here's a place where we can dump all this tremendous surplus. And if that goes through, we won't have a dairy industry in Canada. It will happen here in Canada just as it happened in Jamaica.
Thank you. Okay, we're gonna go back to Rob or Corey has something
I
quick
just
to
want to make
say.
a quick comment,
Yeah.
if that's okay. I just want to say what we're all talking about broadly is exploitation. Exploitation of the producer, exploitation of the consumer. When you look at, I saw a recent stat on Africa and the chocolate production there, where only 2% of the profit from chocolate production goes back into the continent, right? I mean, that's a crazy middleman that's just taking all kinds of money. And that's why we see these massive price increases at the grocery store, right? It's not that it takes that much to produce, it's that we're being robbed. And so I just think that we need to keep that in mind, that capitalism really has to go if we're going to have any kind of future.
Thanks,
That's it.
Corey. Okay, we're gonna come back to Rob to wrap up.
So my comments are going to be pretty short because I don't know that much. So yeah, food waste sucks. It's terrible, and it's one of the things that I feel pretty strongly about as someone who actually has experienced food insecurity. So how do you fix food waste? Even here in like a so-called first world country like Canada, how do you do that? I don't know. I mean, it's something I'd like to look into. Supply management. Okay, the Trump administration wants supply management gone. It's probably a mixture of, is it Douglas?
Yes.
Yeah, it's probably a mixture of what Douglas is saying. They want to dump, instead of dumping the 128 million tons on the ground, let's dump it in Canada. And the other half of it is, you know what, I just hate anything that's like even a little bit socialist, so let's just destroy that too. No, it's nasty. The Trump administration is going after supply management, and because, America kind of has a lot of power over like everything, we could lose supply management. It's a real thing, and then the horror show could come here. So that's bad. I don't like that. And really, that's all I have to say because I'm not the most well-versed on like food policy and stuff like that. Maybe if somebody else has something like Barry or Julius wants to maybe add, I'd be more than happy to let their comments go. But I'm done for now. That's pretty much all I have to say.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you very much, Rob.